Hello. Okay, before we get started, generally beer is optional but not required. Would any of you like a beer?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. I will have a beer. Anybody else? No? Was that a...
No.
I guess
I'm good.
You'll have one. Great, 3 beers. That means I have 2 beers for the audience. And we will hand these out if we get particularly good questions from you. So there's...
How often do you get served beer by Jeff Moss?
Yes. Very rare.
Thank you.
This is the highest quality can of Hell's.
It is a local beer, though.
Is it?
Yeah.
With a name like Hell's, I
It cannot be possibly worse.
can't imagine why it hasn't caught on. Okay, great. Hey, welcome everybody. This is our Locknote session. If you haven't been here before, I'll be the moderator. I'm Jeff Moss. And sitting, I'll start to my left, Vandana from Sneak, Stefano Zanero from the Politecnico of Milano, Meadow Ellis from an unnamed fintech company, and James Forshaw from Project Zero at Google. And they're all prolific reviewers on a review board helping select the content. And so now we've got some questions they don't know I'm going to ask. We've got some questions we've all agreed on. We're going to start a conversation, have some beer, and then at some point we'll start to open it up to conversations to the audience. Sound like a plan? Great. Now we can start. So, first off, this is the easy question, right? Trends, you see how many hundreds of submissions? You've got to sort them into tracks. There might be competing talks that are interesting. Is there any, for those of you who maybe have not submitted to a session, to Black Hat or another conference, are there certain things you see and you're like, nope, definitely not having them speak here? Or things you see that are immediately like, we shortlist this? Any kind of advice for people or any trends that you observed?
Folks, anything?
I would start then. I think the trends that I have seen in the past couple of months with the conference is a lot of submissions around AI. There are some which really stand out, which have really good content and which have been selected here. But there was some content, some talks which were actually AI talks written by AI. So we had to reject them.
Did you detect them with AI?
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And the way they were structured. So absolutely.
We could have AI listen to the talk. At
That's
that
right.
point, we close the loop.
Oh, yes.
And AI could rate the talk?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those would be a straight no, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. But were there some absolutely must-haves? You see something and you know you want it right away?
I think yes. There were talks which had actually depth in it, where they were talking about the technicalities, where they have seen the data passing through the AI and then getting matured. Those are the kind of talks that we want. We just don't want the LLM 101 talks, but more of talks which have done people have done the thorough research around, whether it's around hardware, whether it's around any software that they have had experience with. I think that's a straight yes. Because we really want to know people experience with it, the stories, the kind of research that they have done. So we are really looking forward to good research work around this area.
We have a saying, I'm trying to promote this saying, when I see a talk and I say, this talk could have been a blog post. So quite often we see talks where the content is very good, the research is absolutely amazing, but from experience we know that the presentation is going to be reading from the slides, which is not something that we want to spend time on because we could
I think that's a really helpful filter.
Yeah.
You read it and you're like, fantastic blog post.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be an amazing blog post I could read at home. When I'm participating in a conference, I want to see someone's struggle, someone's story, someone's history about how they struggled to conduct this research. Because when I'm trying to follow up reading the slides that are very technical, I have time for this at home, whereas I want to see the person behind the research.
Yeah, I think I've sort of on that topic, I always try to stress I was on the speaker coaching as well, and try and stress with people that the slides shouldn't necessarily be like your documented evidence of your research and every single thing that you did and every single technical detail, because the slides are primarily there to carry forward your talk at the conference itself. And so, yeah, if you find that you just have to have all this technical detail, that's where you put it into a blog post, you put it into a white paper that accompanies your talk and provides that background context and additional information that people can refer to in the future. I think it's always a bit of a mistake if people say, oh, this is the only published information about this talk is my slide deck and nothing else.
Yeah. One of the things that always frustrates me is when you see the presentation is really awesome, and then they're like, and we posted it 2 months ago.
Oh, yes.
And you're like, oh, okay, well, it is a blog post at this point.
It is a blog post.
Yeah. And okay, so you mentioned AI a little bit earlier. We're going to talk about that a little bit. It seemed to be quite a popular track. By show of hands, who went in and saw something with the word AI attached to it? Like,
There you go.
Yeah.
yeah, it's very popular. And so we're going to spend a little bit talking about AI. But first, let's go down memory lane with Professor Stefano Zanero. Tell us the history,
Yes,
dating back to the
of
90s or
course.
80s. Because when I first ran into Stefano, I think you were all about genetic algorithm?
No, it was, machine learning for intrusion detection. It was 2004. Nobody cared about that.
Yeah.
So I didn't make any money out of it. That's why I'm an academic. That's the reason.
Yeah. So walk us through memory lane.
Yeah, so we were chatting before, and I was putting together a presentation about uses of AI and machine learning and security. And so in 1986, there was a first intrusion detection system based on expert systems. What are expert systems? Nobody in this room probably remembers, except the very old ones like me. But they were the ChatGPT of the 80s. Everybody was convinced that expert systems would replace doctors. The same thing that you can read now about ChatGPT, they were being said about expert systems. Go forward like 40 years. We are using expert systems. They are part of our systems, but they are nowhere near what was predicted. Then in 1990s, genetic algorithms for detecting malware, artificial immune systems.
Right?
Genetic
This whole
algorithms.
there's this whole computer will take these analogies from the biological
Right.
world, right? And we'll have these
and
immune
everything-
systems and those white blood cells.
Everything is immediately wonderful when you have a biology analogy.
And it turned out, in Europe, I think you studied genetic algorithms like senior year of college. In the United States, it was the junior year of college. So we would get papers at DEF CON or Black Hat on using genetic algorithms to solve things. And we're like, this is a European. They just graduated. This is the last thing they worked on in computer science. So this is the lens that they see everything on.
Exactly. And so the wheel turns. We have all the submissions about ChatGPT now. And in fact, we had several talks about security challenges in using large language models that were very nice. But the wide majority of the talks that we selected were not about applying an LLM to something, because LLMs will become a part of the tools that we have, but they will not replace all the tools that we have. So just like genetic algorithms didn't, just like expert systems didn't.
Right, and small language models. And I'm always curious if the thing that's got our attention now is generative AI, but that seems like it's the low-hanging fruit, easy first thing to sort of implement, and it really captures our imagination, just like super autocorrect, right, or super autocomplete with Clippy 2.0, right, GPT chat. But what's the actual next more valuable? Is it dynamic rewrite of code?
I think that there are a number of things that large language models will do in cybersecurity. Analyzing code is great; it's a great application. Other things will work reasonably well. Extracting information from unstructured text So all of the guys in cyber threat intelligence and the like, that's an area where large language models will do some of the work that now we cannot do or we need to do by hand. But there's other areas like planning, like understanding that go beyond what a large language model can do.
I have a very good example of where AI, that's why I very much like AI, because it's actually helping me in my job in hardware security, where, for example, I have to identify a chip that has something on pin 1, something on pin 7. I can spend 3 days searching on the internet where it is, or just ask ChatGPT or whatever the implementation, which ones actually match. But there's a problem with that because I have to check after it. I have to. It's not perfect. So it's definitely useful. It will be useful for security and also for security research in hardware.
It accelerates your investigation.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. You still have to verify it, but you get there.
I get a hint where to go, so it's absolutely helpful.
The verify part escapes most students. I can say that from experience.
Yeah.
So one of the attendees asked me. He said, "Wow, this AI is so popular and it's growing and growing. Have you thought you should do a black hat AI only conference?" Like, I said, Well, remember when mobile was a thing, and that was it? It was all consuming. Everything was about mobile. And cloud, everything was about cloud. But now it's just kind of baked in. It really has that same feeling. Everybody down on the show floor has AI in their product. But they'll sound weird in 4 years saying now with AI, right? Are they going to just say now with algorithms? Or is it just going to be assumed 4 or 5 years from now that, of course, you're using AI? If you're not using AI, then your product's not as competitive. You know, like, is this just a moment that we're in?
Yeah, I think the AI is that buzzword, sort of like people can put it in because, oh, you're talking about AI because that's the thing, the topic at the moment. But a lot of the kind of talks that are about AI are more general talks, in the sense that if you're, say, attacking a LLM to try and do prompt injection or something like that, you're just exploiting a product of some kind. Like, you're not, like, the AI is kind of almost irrelevant in some ways. And if you're using it for finding security bugs, well, we've got a long history of fuzzing talks, which talk about writing a fuzzer to do a particular thing. And I think it may become a point where, yeah, as you say, Jeff, like, it's kind of just assumed that if you're like AI fuzzing or whatever it ends up being called, is just a technique that you use for finding the same bugs that you're currently finding today. Instead of using a fuzzer, you might use some sort of AI model to extract bug information and analysis of like signals and stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't want to get swept up in it, but I don't want to miss the opportunity. But it does feel like it's like a cloud. It's going to change the way a lot of things are done, but it's not all-consuming. You know, it's not like a new branch that's forever.
It is opening. It is because AI doesn't ask questions. AI just does what we tell it to do, or actually what it thinks it wants from us, what we want from it. And I think that's very helpful, especially in security research, because we as humans are biased about, we have our own experiences and predictions and convictions, so we follow certain paths, whereas AI, because it doesn't think, it doesn't know, it just analyzes text, so it will do something that we would never think of. I have a very good example that I always bring up when talking about security research specifically. This comes from art. I know the AI and art is a very delicate thing because artists are concerned that AI is going to replace them, which is a different topic. However, if I ask AI to give me a picture of a giant herring hovering over London, it would just do it and not ask me, like, why do you want herring, London, what? Same thing with security research. I would ask it to do something or come up with something, and it will just do it because it doesn't think. And then I can take it and follow it up. So I think it's going to change the way we think because it's going to do something that we would never think of.
There's some examples of asking it to write, Python code, and people are getting some great work done very quickly. But it turns out the code it's generating is, 6, 7, 8 years old out of what current practice would be, because that's what it's been trained on. If it's trained on 20 years of Python, and it's going to not have the most recent bug-free version, which is fine if you're running it in an isolated lab. But if you're going to put that online, just know that yes, you'll get some great code quickly to proof of concept, but it's not modern, security conscious. And people seem to equate running code with it's all up to date and great. The other thing I notice is AI seems to be a prediction engine, right? It makes predictions quickly, and they'll be making them quicker and quicker, faster and faster, cheaper and cheaper. And when you can get something cheaper, you'll do more of it. And so I've said in the past, I would try to make all of my problems, if I was in business or security, I'd try to make all of my problems prediction problems, because now your problem is a good match for AI. And it looks like there's probably classes of security work that we do that would be great for prediction. Like, I think, Stefano, you mentioned log analysis. Like, is this a valid login or not? That's a great prediction, right? I haven't really thought through, though, what the things that are not predictions that it won't be very good at. But I think we're going to get a lot of mileage on the predictive areas where it is valuable if you've trained the model or tagged the model, appropriately.
But maybe even after training it, we need to validate it. Because if we do not validate it, there will be problems wherein you're doing a surgery and this is how it has to be done, because it's trained on that way, but there is some other underlying problem which it might miss on. So it has to be validated.
Yeah.
I think that's something which is very, very important when we talk about AI. Or maybe in the coming years, we'll start asking AI that what would be the new risk which AI might face.
Yeah.
So we would not be just thinking about what could be a problem, but we'll be asking AI for that.
There's a part, I run this project on the side, infocon.org, where I try to archive all the security conferences I can find. And lately, I bought this big, expensive GPU, and I'm running the Whisper LLM to translate everything into English and create these caption files. And the problem I find is security language is kind of specialized sometimes, so the translations are off. And there's no way for me to create like a bias file or a training model file where I can say, no, it's IoT, right? It's not IOT or something. And so I cannot feed back into the model. So the model never gets smarter. The only way for me to get a smarter Whisper is to go back to Hugging Face, somehow convince them to update their model. And so, yes, I can use AI. It's very powerful, but I can never adapt it because the cost or the tools to me are inaccessible. They're only accessible to these giant companies with billions of dollars of compute. And I kind of worry then, as researchers, how do we ever, we don't have billions of dollars of compute. We don't have these giant models. We don't have the data provenance and the data cards. And at some point, are we kind of aced out of doing this research, and so we're forever fiddling with prompts because we can never get at the heart of the problem?
So there's two different things here. One is all of the research that you can do from outside the model, prompt injection, all sorts of things. And that research is happening. You have seen it here, and researchers are doing it. There's some research that cannot be done meaningfully without being able to train a model. And training some types of models is just out of the question for most researchers. Not just Black Hat has always been about the single researchers that spent their time and picked that niche and found something. There are some areas that have already been outside scope for these researchers. You cannot do real research on aviation security because you cannot have access to an A380. And you cannot do research on the internals of models unless you are working for OpenAI or one of their competitors, because They are going to be the ones. So some areas of research have already been
Closed off.
not really accessible to researchers. But I think that the problem that you were mentioning goes hand in hand with another limit of generative AI and large language models, the way that we are using them right now, which is asking them things, so creating prompts. Basically, creating a prompt is the equivalent of programming, right? In using a large language model. It's like you are using a very, very complex API that you don't really know what it does, and you are trying to adapt your prompt to make it do something. This is what the experience of using an LLM is for most people from outside. Now, the problem is that if you're doing that on a problem that you already know the solution to, you can do what is called prompt engineering. You can adapt your prompt to try to make it so that a system that has an obscure internal way of working that you do not really know gives you the answer that you expect. But how do you do that when you're trying to use that system to get answers that you do not know what to expect about? That's the reason why it works very well for what you were describing before. I'm trying to figure out which of these components is on that board.
Because I know what to expect. Yeah.
Because you know how to check the answer, right?
Absolutely.
But at the same time, prediction, it works well if we have any type of machine learning really works well if we have a reliable way to understand if the model is giving us the right results before applying it to something unknown. But the real problematic areas in all machine learning, not just in using large language models, is what happens if you do not know the answer. If you are trying to get the model to give you a knowledge that you didn't have before. And that's a deep area of research where there's not a real answer. Not yet and not in the future. It's really a hard question.
I suppose one separate aspect of like the difficulty of changing the model, and like only large companies can even deal with that. Even large companies, of course, spend an enormous amount of resources, enormous amount of money to build up these brand new models. And one of the things this week which sort of came out is that if you type a certain name into ChatGPT, it just shuts you off completely. And the best current theory is this is like a GDPR or something like that, where they're having to literally block certain names, and their only recourse is to basically stop your session.
Oh, right. Because they can't remove that from the training data.
Yeah, and so like these massive models which take months and months and months of high performance computing to build could become almost instantly useless because they're incapable of being redacted. You can't remove data which shouldn't be there, or people don't want to be there.
Right, there's a lawsuit that says, no, you have to do X, and your only recourse is to...
Which was actually the subject of one of the talks that we accepted, the one on the lobotomy of LLMs to try to remove a Trojan example from the side, which is one of the big problems. If you have a model that has been trained with a lot of expense, and you happen to know, and how you happen to know is already another open research question, that there is a Trojan example in the middle, you need to remove that, and or either you waste all the money that you spent, or you need to find a way to remove that, which is not an easy thing to do. So,
I want to talk about other things besides AI. Though
yes,
I think we could go on it forever. James, you mentioned an area around recent technical advancements in confidential computing and confidential computing assumptions. And when you mentioned it, we were talking beforehand. I was thinking, wasn't there an Intel instruction that they had to remove? They stopped supporting it in the CPU because it wasn't. It was like it actually didn't do what they thought. TXT or SGX, but now they're back with newer technologies, right?
Well, yeah, certainly in the Intel side of things, SGX has proven to be not as secure as perhaps it was originally designed. If you don't know what confidential compute is, it's primarily aimed at obviously your big cloud providers, because currently a cloud provider can just sort of introspect your VM running in the cloud and just steal all your data in theory. Of course, you have to trust them at that level. And so this hardware and software combination, which is either sort of Intel TDX AMD's SEV S&P. There's an ARM version as well. Tries to do things like memory encryption to try and make this more secure. But one of the talks I saw was on ACPI, machine language injection. And it was really interesting to me that, again, the whole idea is not to trust the cloud provider, but then the cloud provider is apparently providing firmware and ACPI tables which boot your VM in this secured environment. And that seems that feels like it defeats the entire purpose of this technology. And you're adding all this complexity and all this difficulty when, you're still then trusting ultimately the cloud provider. And of course, some unnamed cloud providers, for example, are providing both the platform and the operating system itself. So, you're already trusting them.
You're double trusting.
Yeah. Does it matter that the memory's encrypted if you already trust them to not compromise your VMs? And so I just found it interesting that sort of there's a big push for this, and then you sort of think, well, yeah, are the assumptions true? Are the assumptions actually realistic in the real world?
I think you said something there when you brought up confidential computing. There was a couple previous buzzwords that I think, who here is really paying attention to zero trust? Right? That's kind of coming and going, right? There's a couple buzzwords that were a lot of supply chain concern.
If you had asked this last year, it would have been a full.
Oh, yes.
I think you bring up you brought up earlier a whole list of all the things that kind of came and went.
Yeah.
Supply chain.
Zero trust, supply chain, we talk about ML, now we're talking about LLM, and then the list goes on. Every year there is a new buzzword that comes into the picture, and then we talk about, oh, we are powered by this. Whether we are powered by it or not, but we are powered by it some way. So I spoke to a lot of vendors and they said, oh, now we are powered by AI. But what are they powered by? It's still a discussion. And similarly, I think maybe next year or the very next year, there'll be something else that'll come into the picture. The most important thing to think about is that are we actually going in depth in all of these things? Like you said, we were talking about cloud, and now we're talking about AI. Maybe it's a new era, but are we really going into the depth of it? Are we training it right? Are we actually giving the right data to it? And there was another discussion about that the data is actually maybe 6 years old, 7 years old, or maybe 3 years old. So is it giving us the accurate information? Is it giving us the latest vulnerabilities information, or even the code that we are writing with it? And another thing to think about is that there were some hacks which happened with a few companies wherein the developer actually gave the PII data as well as the confidential information of the company to the AI, thinking that it will give us the good code. But again, we are training it, so it'll be there forever. So whatever you train it, it'll be there. Even if you train it wrong, it'll be the same. So we were actually having some discussion around before the session, we came here for the session, that if we train it in certain way, it'll actually stay there. And if you train it saying that, oh, you have to do it, it'll only do that. It'll not use its brain. So there are certain recommendations that you should have, which you vet it out. At the same time, how you're going to use it, how you're going to use that data is very important.
I think you were talking too, how do you apply, there's a bit around CVSS scores, right?
Yes.
And I don't know how you score an AI vulnerability, but before you even try to contemplate that, you had some concerns around the mediums.
Yes.
Right? Maybe talk about that a little bit.
Oh, sure. So when we talk about CVSS scoring, it's still a confusion for a lot of organizations. I would say most of the organizations. It might sound controversial, but that's actually the case. There was a talk that I attended yesterday, which actually brought out really good points, that there are 6 areas that we should look at. There are few that they have actually worked upon, whether it's the right tagging of CVSS scoring, or the right kind of data that is there, or the vulnerabilities that are actually impacting an organization. Now, when we talk about CVSS scoring, we have marked a vulnerability as a medium or a low scoring vulnerability, and then we forget about it because it's medium, it's low, and we only try and fix the critical ones or high ones because they may be very low, or maybe the number is low for them, so we want to actually fix them, and then leadership want to actually take care of them. But what comes a point is that now what I've seen is that the attackers are actually targeting medium severity vulnerabilities because they have not been fixed for maybe ages.
So now there's a million mediums.
Oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
that's right. And then they're impacting not just one system of yours, but maybe multiple systems, multiple applications that you have. How would you deal with that? And even if one of your system is breached, how would you stop attacker to pivot inside your systems? You wouldn't even know it maybe for years. So that's something to think about, whether maybe these medium vulnerabilities which you're not fixing, which they're piling up, how are you going to handle them?
So I want to make sure I get a question to Meadow on hardware research before I go to the audience, or if you'd like.
I mean, I'm happy to. I mean, as I said when we were preparing, I can rant forever, so I will try to keep it short. But I do have a rant on hardware security, and I think I had a similar rant last year on this very stage, on a Locknote, that there doesn't seem to be many talks about hardware research that goes deep into hardware. Because usually hardware research means that you dump the firmware, find the JTAG or whatever other serial port, and then you get the firmware and start doing software research. Whereas, and because there are two ways to look at it. One it may be that there are no hardware bugs left anymore, or maybe we are not researching them. And I just realized today, as we were preparing, that there was a time not long ago that barrier to entry to hardware research was quite low for a few years, because you could buy Raspberry Pi, you can buy a scope for a few £100, and basically your lab could be done in reasonable money. Whereas now, because the hardware is so advanced, the manufactured hardware is so advanced, you need a lot of equipment to do proper research. And I have a very good example of that, where a few years ago I was asked to prove that, you remember the cold boot attack, when you had to freeze the memory, and people are doing the attacks with spraying cooling substance on it, and then it worked. However, we have now, because the memory is more complex and more tightly packed, it's much more difficult to just spray on it and see if it works. However, if you have a cooling chamber and a lot of time and a lot of other tools, maybe you could do this. But you cannot do this with at home. So I'm thinking that maybe there is a lot of potential for research in that area, but the barrier to entry, because of the complexity of tools, of products, is so high, it's actually becoming very difficult to do very good hardware research. So I think it's not that, I was thinking that maybe we have fixed everything in hardware. There are no more hardware bugs. But maybe there are, but it's just like, because they are so complex, we need more resources to be able to research that. So yeah, I'm hoping for next year to see something like someone freezing something to death or setting something on fire, like something, and lasers, and lasers, and lasers.
That's not like ideas in particular, not to university students.
It's like when you need a tunneling electron microscope in your lab to even look at you're kind of got a barrier.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. Yeah.
Okay, let's do questions from the audience. I've got 2 beers to give away. You got microphones on either side. Remember, you're asking a question, not giving a dissertation. And just say your name, kind of like where you're coming from, and if you have got it directed toward a particular person or just in general.
Hey, Daniel from Security HQ. I have we've talked a lot about like AI today. So my question is, kind of simple, but yet it goes a little bit deep. Maybe you also know this film that's called AlphaGo, and also actually a model that's named. It's a product of Google DeepMind team. Great job, guys. You're doing a very good thing. So, question is over-relying on like AI-driven tools for security actually may become problematic in the future, and maybe bad actors will actually use some like moves like Lee Sedol, or what's his, sorry, Lee Sedol made to defeat AlphaGo. So basically using unconventional logic. What do you think about that?
We have someone here from Google.
I don't know the deal. I think there's already that sort of like level of adversarial, like especially like in the machine learning side of things. Like there's been plenty of research, sort of like, can you get the sort of like image recognition systems to detect a dog when actually it's a picture of a cat and things like that. I can certainly see if like certainly sort of the same AI model is used everywhere, that if there is some clear way of exploiting it to do something, like I like the example of like on the social media where there's clearly like Gen AI bots, and someone says ignore previous instructions, and there's a prompt injection on it, and that kind of thing taken to the nth scale, like something which isn't trivial, which isn't kind of just haha, that's kind of funny. I could fully imagine like there could be something in the future which is really catastrophic if everyone uses the same thing.
Yeah. Right. Thank you.
Yep.
Hello, I'm Marcello Mongeri from University of Catania, PhD candidate. Maybe it's not the right. They provided me a question. I want to give the same question to you as professional in cybersecurity.
Wait. So that's not a question?
It's a question.
Okay, good.
Yeah, it's a question. Since we talked about AI and there is the public opinion stating that AI will steal our job and so on, I'm not believing that much, but I think, most of the jobs will be maybe over. Like when I think about a SOC analyst of level 0, level 1, I think it will be soon replaced by AI. So the question is, sorry for the introduction. The question is, what do you think there will be the top skills in cybersecurity in 5 years, let's say?
Can I do
Go
a
for it.
take on this? So there was a meme going around. I don't even think that it was actually Louis C.K. that said this. There was a meme going around saying, well, if you think that an immigrant that has no knowledge of the language, no connections, no degree is going to steal your job, then maybe it's you that suck. So I think that the same applies to the AI thing. So maybe the only jobs that will be stolen are jobs that maybe if humans are not doing those jobs, it's better for humans. So I think that, outside the joke, I think that there's a lot of jobs, and you identified them correctly, like analysis, correlation, extracting information from texts, and so on, which will be augmented by AI. It's the same thing that we have seen happen with driving. Self-driving is not working. It's not going to work for the foreseeable future. But assistance to human driving up to the point where driving is safer and easier, that's already there. And the same thing is going to happen, at least for the foreseeable future, with AI applications to security, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Hello. Stefano from Intesa. I have two questions, actually. So the first one is, I think we are going too much down into a rabbit hole in terms of grasping the new technology, or let's say the big access to this technology. And so we are afraid about the workload or stealing our jobs in terms of privacy, vulnerabilities, and all of that, which is workload at the end of the day. However, one thing that I do see that has happened, and it's happening, that at the moment LLM I see as big GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. There is no job being done on classification of ingested data. So what you can get in return, yes, allows you to be faster in your research, but it's never on point. it can hint you to stuff, but it's never the stuff you're looking into. So I was wondering if you foresee or if you think it's going to be useful, or is it going to happen, some sort of data structuring before the ingestion. So for example, an LLM doesn't know if a piece of information is personal, confidential, doesn't know. So it just ingests it.
So there's some reports out about the giant warehouses of people in India data tagging, right? I mean, if it's not super complicated, like none of us could afford to have thousands of workers tagging images, right? And your model is dependent on how well your data is tagged. And there's some talk that pretty soon there'll be high enough confidence that the models can tag the models in sort of a first level, and then the humans, thousands of humans, will now not have to tag everything. They'll just tag the smaller, more questionable bits. And maybe that gets you to a higher confidence level, right? Because you can get rid of the vast majority of it. But I'm not convinced. The Chinese have this concept of 3 different data sets. They have personal, like PII data, they have government data, and then they'll have government data meaning like secret data, and then this normal government data, like tax rates or whatever. And they want to keep them kind of separate. And so the problem is, soon as the PII data gets mingled with the government tax or medical data, what is it? Right? And it's sort of like, well, red and green equals, pretty soon it's a mess again. And so you could see that starting from a good place, they want to be able to understand the different sources of data, but it falls apart at scale. And so...
So you mean like they are trying to do in post, but not pre? So.
Yeah, or they're trying to say every hospital has to tag the data, and every consumer thing has to be tagged. And okay, but the next step is where it all falls apart.
Yeah. And if I may, second question. It's a broad, very general question. It's about the other aspects. So still, so for example, the saturation created by generative AI. So not to the level of poisoning themselves, but to the point where they ingest data, they produce data, they re-ingest the data, and therefore the results are less and less on point. And I think that this, I don't think it will go to the point of Bitcoin with the proof of work, so the amount of electricity being spent in this, but something that, I don't know, meeting minutes that I could write in 5 points, few lines, few words. Of course, they come with more context with, I don't know, Copilot for minutes, but it's also pollution. It's not short.
Right.
You see, so, and it, also not pollution just in terms of the ingestion cycle, but also environmental.
Okay, we're running out of time, so I think I got the point. I'll defer to Stefano, but I have a feeling it's a self-limiting problem, because at some point, if it degrades the data, the model will no longer be useful, and the market will choose another model that doesn't suffer that problem. And so I think it's not an endless death spiral. I think it's just certain models are going to make themselves irrelevant that suffer from that.
Anyway, if the LLMs feeding themselves eliminate the LLMs, problem solved. We can go back to talking about just about anything else
Zero trust.
than LLMs.
Yeah.
It'd be funny if the last remaining jobs for humans are generating random content just for the LLMs to consume.
Biological content.
Yeah.
There.
Okay, last question.
TV series idea right there.
I mean, I'll wander off the LLM path. We seem to have got stuck for a bit.
Yes.
Back at the beginning of this year, there was the XEdge util vulnerability and backdooring. Given that, for instance, the Linux kernel has become a lot more of a commercial entity, what do you see as happening as the future of open source as it becomes so security dependent? Is it going to end up with individual developers being supported, or just moving into this sort of consortium model like we have with Linux?
Wow.
I've got thoughts, but I don't want to take away from any of the...
I would just say when it comes to open source, what we call it as with great power comes great responsibility. So there is still debate going on around it. I've seen, even when you talk about the utilities, last year, if you remember, there was a maintainer for 2 libraries, Scholar and Faker. They were different. But because the person could not maintain it, actually there was a loop condition which was added to one of those libraries. And what happened is, actually, the applications went down for a lot of organizations. Again, there are a lot of good open source tools, maybe OWASP has and other organizations have, which people are leveraging, organizations are leveraging, which are really good. And if I have to say, 80 to 90% of the apps on the internet is actually using open source. It is here to stay, but it's our responsibility to make sure that we are vetting it out properly. We cannot just say that, oh, I'm using it, this is the best. Most of the organizations are using, this is the best. This is the best, but then if a vulnerability comes in, whether you would be responsible, maintainer would be responsible, or who would be responsible for it? So we'll have to keep checking on that.
I think there's a trend that we see developing now. It started maybe 2 years ago, and you can see it from Google, Amazon, AMIs, and it's this concept of a software curator. And we think that this is, or we wrote a paper for CISA on this, so it should be public soon. But the idea is that there's these intermediaries with the skills and the capabilities to review XZ or whatever. There are these hyperscalers, there's people that are hosting cloud instances where you can get in like a pre-vetted app store, for example. And think of Red Hat, right? Red Hat doesn't develop Linux, but they get Linux patched. They have experts that work on the project. It's a back and forth between them. A company can buy a product from Red Hat, and they can get a level of service, and they can get like a quality of service that they can guarantee, right? There's liability transfer to Red Hat. Red Hat accepts some liability for open source. Open source Linux, they're never accepting liability, but Red Hat accepts some liability, right? So that's the curation model. So if you are a company and you're looking to find somebody who can maintain your key core open source related projects, curation is really where it's starting to move to, because the open source people love it, because now they're working with people that know their project, they can file the reports appropriately, they're appropriately staffed, they don't have to deal with so much just random noise, and then companies like it because they're dealing with a single point, the software is kind of vetted, and then you don't have to re-deal with the software over and evaluate it. So it's kind of concentrating power a little bit, but we don't see a viable path forward to deal with these problems without a sort of curation function. And there's different kinds of curation, but I'm just saying, like, when you hear the word curation and you see companies talking about curation, search on it now. You'll find a handful of companies that are in that space, and you can pay them contracts, you can have them, or you can download the software. Google has some stuff internally that you can pay to have access to, like a sort of like a trusted app store. So I think that's where Linux will go, right? There'll be a curator that fixes XZ or takes on the burden of maintaining it because they have enough customers that are reliant on it. Yeah. Anybody else? Okay, we're running out of time, so that's it. I still have 2 beers left. I have to determine, how are we going to allocate the beers? How about whoever comes up here first and takes the beer? Here you go, sir.
And soup.
Yep, you've been waiting the whole time. I've seen your eyes. You've been eyeing that beer the whole time. Right on, cheers. All right, well, thank you, everybody. We're going to stand around and talk for a little bit, but I think with that, we're going to officially close out Black Hat 2024 Europe. Thanks for sticking around, and thanks for the questions. Cheers.